shading text the way I did in the Blenderman project is actually relatively easy and a lot of fun to do. Now, before I do that, I'm actually going to bring in an HDR so we have a little bit of lighting and something to work with. So I can show you the effects on lighting on your text the way I ended up doing it. So I'm going to hit Shift-C here to bring up my rendered view, and whenever I'm doing any type of shading, if possible, I like to see the final result so it's easy for me to gauge exactly what I'm doing. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is actually bring in an environment texture, save very quickly, and go over to the Blender Cloud add-on and just pull in a random HDRI. I think for the project, most of the ones came out of this small world folder, but let me just grab one that has maybe, see if this elevator one will work. Put it in. Now obviously, again, you could do this with any HDR that you find. Doesn't really make much of a difference, but I'm going to leave the background on here so you can see exactly what's going on. Bring in a slightly higher resolution version so it's a little bit clearer, and now we have the text itself. I'm going to switch over to material mode here, select the outside text first, make a new shader, and start working away. So generally, this type of text, as you've seen it in the video, is going to be very sort of metal looking. It's something that's used quite often in superhero movies and other movies and that type of stuff. So it's quite easy to create very quickly. Now, first thing I'm going to do is add in a mix shader and add in a glossy shader. So that way we can get really nice glossy looking text, and add in a layer weight with the Fresnel slot to control the amount of reflections to make them look a little bit more realistic. Now generally, if you're doing metal or this metal type of text, your diffuse color is going to be quite dark and your glossy roughness is going to be fairly low, obviously depending on your preferences. If you want sort of very non-glossy looking text, then of course you can bring the roughness up and you don't really have to worry about it too much. Now I want to have this really sort of nice gold looking text the way I had, so I'm going to change the glossy shading a little bit more to the yellow orangish side, and same with my diffuse. I'm going to copy this color over, but I'm just going to drop it down. So this way I'm still mixing in a bit of diffuse, which can be considered a little bit of cheating, but if it works, it works. So I just use the same color and just bring it down in value. There we go, something like that. Now I'm going to turn off this first text first so we can actually see what's going on. And what I want to do is I want to add in sort of those metal looking lines. Now I like to do a lot of this stuff procedurally because it's quite easy and quite quick. So I'm going to add in a noise texture and hit Control T for mapping coordinates, and use the object mapping coordinates so it just gets projected into 3D space onto the object. I'm going to set this to texture. Some stuff works a little bit easier if you're trying to control scale and rotation in texture mode. And again, you can experiment with these. Obviously, they're just tools in your toolbox. So if you find the pointer, vector, or normal ones easier to work with when it comes to changing this stuff, then go for it. Obviously, nobody's stopping you. I'm going to Shift Control click this so I can preview it. Again, if you don't have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled in the user preferences, I really highly advise you to do so. So now we can actually see what this noise map is producing. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I want those really sort of fine lines. So I'm going to see what we have to do to mess with the scale. So one thing I could do is actually mess with this scale with the X scale, bring it down just a touch. There we go. Maybe bring up the Z scale a little bit, maybe even more, because we want these really long streaky lines. Apparently that's not doing much, so I'm messing with the wrong scale. I think it's the Y scale. There we go. Bit much still. Bring it up. And you might have noticed at this point that yes, the sides of the shading over here aren't perfect. Now we can have a look at how we can do this. Obviously, we might have to change this up again. No, that's not going to work. And again, this is just always a bit of messing around, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. And for now, I'm not going to worry about it too much. But it's good to know that with the rotation, you can change a whole bunch of stuff and you get these sides looking correct as well. But for the sake of this tutorial, I want to do this fairly quickly just to show you the end result. Now, we have this set up already. The next thing we're going to do is just bring in a math node, add it in here, set it to multiply, and put this into the displacement slot. Now, I'm not using micro displacement, I'm just using regular bump displacement. so I'm not going to change anything in the settings. And as you might see, you start getting these really interesting lines. Now the side is bugging me after all, so I am going to change it. Now I'll have a look at how we can sort this out. You change this to 90 degrees, but it might mean that we need to change our scale back and we have to scale different axes. So let's see what happens if I scale this down. Nope, that's not it. See what happens if I scale this up or down. Nothing really going on. So it's probably going to be our y-axis that we need to scale up or scale down. Now obviously you can choose to do this in a horizontal fashion or a vertical fashion. And I'm going to mess with the scale here. See if that gives me something. And yes, I cheated. I went to go have a look at the original files. But as you can see, we get some really nice shading on the side of the text here. And if we really overdo it just for a second, you can see the shading is working on the front of the text as well. So now the only thing that's left to do, and this is why I do shading and lighting sort of in tandem, and bring down the value a little bit over here. And we go back into our HDR, and you've probably seen this in the look development part already. What I'm going to do is add in texture coordinates and sort of mess around with these. So what I'm going to do is turn it around, but the most important thing to note is those highlights and that bevel I was talking about earlier. So the cool thing about this is if you start messing with your HDR, you can get really interesting highlights and your text sort of changes color a little bit, and by animating a lot of this stuff you can get really dynamic text just by turning around the HDR. Now you can bring up the strength as well if you want to, and again you can mess with the colors. I like using a gamma one. Obviously it's not going to be PBR, it's not going to be correct or whatever you want to call it, but it works just fine. As long as your end result looks cool, it's really not that big of a deal. Again, watch out with noise if you're going to change the colors of your HDR. I've noticed that if you go really extreme, you can get some nice, or not nice, you can get some really annoying noise that's very hard to get rid of. So with that done, I'm going to go back. And this is definitely not the best lighting, but I'm just going to move on to the next text object. We can fix that in just a second. Grab the material, hit the 2 over here, and that way we can just start changing the colors a little bit. And if you really wanted to, you could change the scale of the noise so it looks slightly different. There we go. So it doesn't, it's not one big flow from one text to the other. And maybe change this to something a little bit more red. Same with the color over here. Bring this down just a bit. And now we're getting closer to sort of the end result that we had for the BlenderMan project. Now, again, it might be worth scaling this just a touch. There we go. So they're slightly larger, and bringing the value down of your displacement here, of your bump. So that way we have some really interesting looking text. And go back to the HDR, and I just want to show you the way I keep going back and forth between these two. That way you can always really be evaluating your end result and make sure that you're still working on something that looks good and you still have a lot of options available to you. So maybe something like this. Have a little bit of a light streak over the text on one side, and you could even animate it like this, so the light streak starts on one side and moves over to the other side. You get this really interesting, cool looking dynamic text. Now with that being said, I'm just going to open up my properties window here and go into my world properties. I'm going to set the ray visibility of my background to off basically, and that will remove the visibility of the HDR from your background, but you'll still see, it'll still get all the lighting and all of your shaders will still get all the effects. So that way we can sort of judge it a little bit better. And again, if I show you the Z-axis, if you would animate this, you get really, really cool text. If we go back to our text, I've selected my back text over here. I just want to bring the saturation down a little bit so it's not as yellow. Do the same thing for the reflections here. And there we go. This is just very quick, but this goes to show a procedural shader like this is set up extremely quickly, and obviously this is subjective, and if you don't like this kind of style, you could use the same techniques to do slightly different things, but it looks quite nice. And yeah, that's it for this section.